You know, when you look at the pantheon of modern comedy, there is this sort of uh, neat, organized hierarchy.
Hmm.
You've got the stadium fillers, the Kevin Harts of the world. Then you have the sitcom billionaires, your Seinfelds, and then the cultural critics like a Dave Chappelle.
Right.
Yeah.
They all played the game. They understood the rules, and they won. Go
Yeah.
big. They won the game, and they got the trophy. But then, standing just off to the side, maybe smoking a cigarette and looking slightly, I don't know, confused by the whole affair, is Norm Macdonald.
He's in a completely different category.
Right.
It's almost incorrect to even judge him by the same metrics.
How so?
Well, if you just look at his resume on paper, fired from his biggest job, starred in movies that, famously bombed at the box office, a sitcom that did okay but wasn't a cultural phenomenon,
Right.
you might think, well, okay, this guy had a rocky career. But then you talk to the people who actually do this for a living, the comedians themselves, and the whole conversation just shifts entirely. That's the paradox, isn't it? That's what we're really digging into today. You have David Letterman, and this is a man who is famously stingy with his compliments.
Oh, notoriously so.
He calls Norm the best stand-up comic, period. Not one of the best, the absolute best.
And you have Conan O'Brien, who has interviewed, literally everyone, saying Norm had the most unique comedic voice he ever encountered. He even called him the best, worst talk show guest.
Which is a compliment in its own way.
A huge compliment coming from Conan means he was unpredictable, that he was dangerous on live TV.
And Jon Stewart, a man who arguably defined political comedy for an entire generation, called Norm the funniest person he knew.
So you have this massive disconnect. The industry, the executives, the marketing people, they often didn't know what to do with him. They were constantly trying to fix him, to make him more palatable.
Mm-hmm.
But the masters of the craft, the people who really understand joke structure and timing, they looked at him with just total awe.
I think the easy answer, the one you always hear, is to say he was a comics comic.
Right.
But that feels a bit dismissive to me. It sort of implies he was inaccessible or that you had to be in on the joke to get him.
And that wasn't true.
No. But the more I looked into the sources for this deep dive, the more it seems like his entire life was a deliberate rejection of the way you're supposed to be famous. He refused to play by the rules of celebrity, the rules of television, and then eventually, even the rules of medical transparency.
Exactly. And that's our mission here. It isn't just to retell his famous jokes, though we'll get to those. It's to try and understand the psychology of a man who would willingly, almost gleefully, blow up his own career for a gag.
Yeah.
Whether you're talking about the SNL firing, the gambling addiction where he almost seemed to prefer losing, or hiding a terminal illness for 9 years. There was this through line of commitment that, honestly, it borders on pathology.
It's the commitment to the bit, even when the bit ruins you. And I think we have to start with the style itself. Before we even get into the biography, you have to understand the instrument he was playing. Because if you just read a transcript of a Norm Macdonald joke, half the time it doesn't even look like a joke. It looked like a rambling statement from an old man on a porch.
That was the architecture of it. It was masterful. He perfected the shaggy dog story. Now, in traditional comedy, economy is king, right? You get to the punchline as fast as you possibly can. Set up, punch.
As few words as possible.
Exactly. Norm would do the absolute opposite. He would elongate the setup. He would stretch it out, filling it with these folksy, almost archaic turns of phrase, intentionally boring details, and absolute non sequiturs.
Right.
And what that does is it builds this incredible tension where the audience is thinking, where on earth is this going? There has to be a payoff.
And the payoff, the punchline, when it finally arrived after this long, winding road, was often deliberately underwhelming. It was anti-humor.
The joke was that there was no joke, or that the punchline was so obvious, so stupid, that the absurdity of the long journey was the real punchline.
Which is infinitely harder to pull off than a clever pun.
Oh, it requires total command of the room. You are forcing hundreds, sometimes thousands of people to wait for you. It's a power move, really.
And to understand where that confidence, or maybe it's indifference to the audience's approval, comes from, you have to look at where he came from. Because he wasn't a theater kid. He wasn't some guy who grew up dreaming of being on stage.
No, far from it. He was born in Quebec City, October 17th, 1959. And right out of the gate, we have a classic Norm obfuscation.
Woohoo!
Little lie.
The age thing.
The age thing. For years, if you checked his bio, it said he was born in 1963.
He shaved 4 years off. Why?
Who knows for sure, but it fits his philosophy that the truth is malleable if it serves the story or the persona. He wanted to seem younger, part of a different generation of comics, maybe. But yeah, records confirm it was 59.
And being born in Quebec City is key. It's the heart of French Canada.
But his experience there was very, very specific. His parents were Anglophone teachers. They were English speakers working at a Canadian Forces military base.
And this detail from the sources stood out to me. His father forbade him from learning French.
Think about that. They're living in a thoroughly French province, surrounded by French culture, and the father insists on an English-only household.
It's like building a little cultural bubble.
It created an isolated environment. He was an outsider in his own hometown by design. You have this strict English-speaking household in a sea of French. It forces you to become an observer. You're constantly watching the world around you, but you're slightly fundamentally detached from it.
And he wasn't a slouch. He was smart. The sources say he studied math and philosophy at Carleton University.
So he had the brain for abstract logic, for deconstruction. But he didn't stay in academia. He dropped out, drifted around for a bit, and eventually landed in a job that I think is absolutely the key to understanding his physical presence on stage.
The logging company.
He was a choker man for a logging company.
And we should explain what that is, because it's not a term most people know.
No, and it often gets glossed over as just, blue-collar credibility.
Yeah.
But being a choker man is terrifying. Your job is to crawl over these massive piles of felled timber, often on steep, unstable mountainsides, and wrap steel cables, or chokers, around the logs.
So a machine, a skidder, can then drag them out of the forest.
Precisely. It is wildly dangerous. If a log shifts unexpectedly, you're crushed. If one of those steel cables under tension snaps, it can cut you in half.
So that's your 9 to 5.
That's your workplace. So consider that experience for a moment. He spent his days in a situation where a single wrong step literally meant death. Now, compare that to the danger of a stand-up set not going well.
It puts it in perspective.
When you've worked as a choker man, the idea of an audience of strangers staring at you in silence because a joke failed, it just doesn't register as a threat. The stakes are completely different.
That explains the fearlessness. That's why he was so comfortable with silence. Most comedians are terrified of bombing. It's their absolute nightmare. Norm seemed to almost thrive in it. He would stare down an audience that wasn't laughing until they started laughing at the fact that he didn't care. He won the war of attrition.
He had inoculated himself against stage fright, against the fear of rejection, and he needed that resilience immediately. His first time on stage was at an amateur night at Yuk Yuk's in Ottawa. This was 1985.
And by his own account, it was a total disaster.
He fled the club.
He literally ran away.
He did. He thought he bombed so hard that he just walked out mid-set or right after and swore he'd never go back. The owner, the guy named Howard Wagman, had to basically chase him down and convince him to come back. He told him, "No, you have something. It's weird, but you have something. Come back."
It's just a reminder of how fragile these careers are at the very beginning. One person's encouragement can change the entire trajectory.
And speaking of fragile, things got very real for him very quickly. Shortly after that, in 1986, he's diagnosed with stomach cancer.
In his 20s.
Yeah, he's barely getting started, and he's facing his own mortality head on. It's tragic foreshadowing of the end of his life, obviously, but it also cemented that nihilistic streak in him early on.
Oh, so?
When you go through something like that so young, you tend to strip away a lot of the social niceties, the desire to please everyone. You realize life is short and you might as well say what you think.
So he recovers from that.
He recovers. And by the time he hits the Just for Laughs Festival in Montreal, also in 1986, he's already fully formed. The Montreal Gazette calls him one of the country's hottest comics. The raw material was all there.
And that gets him noticed south of the border. He moves to the U.S., does the whole Star Search thing.
Which is hilarious to even imagine. Norm Macdonald being judged on a point system by Ed McMahon.
It feels like a sketch he would have written.
It really does. But it worked. It got him in the door. He lands a job as a writer, first for the Dennis Miller Show in '92.
Short-lived show, but Miller was a big deal.
A very big deal. And then from there, he goes to write for Roseanne from '92 to '93. And at that moment, Roseanne was the biggest show on television.
It's a monster hit.
And a pressure cooker of a writer's room. But writing for Roseanne Barr taught him something crucial about voice. Roseanne had this very specific, uncompromising working-class voice. And Norm learned how to write jokes that fit a persona perfectly, that sounded authentic coming out of someone's mouth.
A skill set that would take him to his next job.
The biggest job? 30 Rockefeller Plaza, 1993, Saturday Night Live.
Okay, so let's set the scene at SNL in '93. The cast was crowded and loud.
It was a frat house energy. You had Adam Sandler, Chris Farley, David Spade, Mike Myers, Chris Rock. It was a murderer's row of huge comedic personalities.
And then you have Norm.
And then you have Norm. He was older than most of them. He was certainly more well-read,
Right.
and he was slower. And I mean that in terms of his comedic tempo.
Right.
While everyone else was screaming and falling through tables and creating these huge, energetic characters, Norm was doing these very subtle, very weird impressions.
Like his Burt Reynolds on Celebrity Jeopardy.
The genius of the Burt Reynolds impression was that it wasn't really an impression of Burt Reynolds at all.
No, it wasn't.
It was just Norm chewing gum, wearing a cheap toupee, and acting like an entitled, confused jerk who insisted on being called Turd Ferguson. It was about the attitude, not the voice, and it destroyed.
He also did Bob Dole, Larry King, Letterman himself.
He was a solid utility player. But the real revolution happens in 1994 when Lorne Michaels makes a very bold choice and gives him the anchor chair at Weekend Update.
This is the moment where Norm Macdonald becomes Norm Macdonald in the public consciousness. Before him, Update was usually, a bit goofy with Dennis Miller's rants, or it was political satire that leaned into getting applause lines like with Kevin Nealon.
Norm took that desk and he turned all the lights down.
He made it bleak.
He made it bleak and he made it dangerous. He stripped away the performer aspect of it. He wasn't winking at the camera. He looked directly into the lens with his dead-eyed stare and delivered jokes that were, frankly, often horrifying.
The running gags?
The running gags were key. He had recurring jokes about prison rape, about crack whores. He was bizarrely obsessed with David Hasselhoff's inexplicable music career in Germany.
Germans love David Hasselhoff.
It became a mantra. And the Frank Stallone bit. We have to explain this because on paper, it makes absolutely zero sense.
It's the ultimate non sequitur. He would set up a news story about something genuinely terrible. Unemployment numbers are up. There's a nuclear waste leak, a tragic accident.
A real downer of a setup.
And then the punchline, with absolutely no logical connector, delivered with total sincerity, would be, you guessed it, Frank Stallone.
Laughs Frank Stallone, of course, being Sylvester Stallone's less famous musician brother.
The joke wasn't about Frank Stallone. The joke was that a national news anchor was blaming a B-list celebrity for global tragedies. It was daddiest art projected into millions of homes.
And Sylvester Stallone apparently hated it.
He did. When Sly hosted the show, he actually went to Norm and asked him to stop.
Which is amazing. Frank Stallone himself, to his credit, eventually came around and realized it was funny because it was so random and arbitrary. But Norm was poking bears. He wasn't just doing comedy. He was testing the limits of what NBC would let him say on their airwaves.
Which brings us to the controversies, because he wasn't just being weird, he was being offensive in a way that got real serious pushback.
Oh, yeah.
The John Lauder joke from 1996 really stands out to me as a moment where you can just hear the air go out of the room.
So for context, John Lauder was one of the murderers in the Brandon Pena case. This was the horrific hate crime in Nebraska that later became the movie Boys Don't Cry. A truly awful story involving the rape and murder of a trans man.
Just a gut-wrenching story.
So Norm is reporting on the sentencing, and he says, now this might strike some viewers as harsh, but I believe everyone involved in this story should die.
Silence in the studio, I imagine.
You hear gasps, some nervous laughter. But activist groups, particularly LGBTQ groups, were furious. And rightly so, from their perspective. It sounded like he was condemning the victim along with the murderers. NBC had to issue apologies.
Did Norm ever explain it?
He sort of did, later. He said his point was that the entire situation was so filled with human misery and depravity that it was just a black hole. But it was a clumsy way to say it, and it was deliberately provocative.
It was a refusal to be sensitive in a moment that called for sensitivity.
That was his brand. And then there was Michael Jackson.
He was relentless, just absolutely savage.
This was the mid-90s. Jackson was still a pop deity to millions. The first wave of allegations was out there, but most of the media was very, very polite about it. They used phrases like inappropriate conduct.
Norm was not polite.
Norm was the opposite of polite. He would just state flatly, Michael Jackson is a homosexual pedophile. He wouldn't say alleged. He wouldn't make a vague allusion to Neverland. He used the specific, brutal terms.
Even when Jackson was hospitalized for exhaustion.
Especially then. Jackson collapsed on stage. And Norm's joke that Saturday was something like, sources say he's doing better, but don't get any ideas. He is still a homosexual pedophile. He repeated it like a mantra.
What was the goal there? Just shock value?
I think he was trying to force the audience to confront the reality of the situation rather than the celebrity of it. He was cutting through the hero worship and saying, look at what this person is accused of.
And that absolute refusal to bow to celebrity, to protect a powerful person, is what set up the single biggest conflict of his entire career.
The O.J. Simpson saga.
This isn't just a comedian telling jokes anymore. This becomes a cultural war fought from inside a major television network.
You have to set the scene. It's 1995. The O.J. trial is the only thing happening in America. It's on TV 24/7. The country is completely divided, often along racial lines. But inside NBC, there's a very specific and, for Norm, a very dangerous power dynamic. The president of NBC West Coast is a man named Don Ohlmeyer.
The big boss. The guy in charge.
The man who built NBC's must-see TV dominance. And, critically, one of O.J. Simpson's best and oldest friends.
It's not just a casual acquaintance.
No, they golf together constantly. Ohlmeyer was part of O.J.'s inner circle. To give you an idea of the loyalty, after the acquittal, Ohlmeyer threw a party for the jurors who voted not guilty.
Wow.
That is the level of personal investment we are talking about.
So the head of the entire network on the West Coast is firmly, publicly Team OJ, and the anchor of that network's flagship comedy news segment is not.
Not even close. Norm, along with his head writer Jim Downey, decided from day one that O.J. was guilty. Period. And they treated it as an incontrovertible fact.
And the jokes were brutal.
They were relentless, every single week. A new book about the O.J. trial alleges that O.J.'s lawyers knew he was guilty. In a related story, the sky is blue.
Yeah, just completely matter of fact.
And when the verdict came in not guilty, the entire country held its breath to see what SNL would do. Norm opened Update that night with a very simple, devastating line. He just looked at the camera and said, "Well, it is finally official. Murder is legal in the state of California."
It's just such a perfect line. And he knew who was watching. He knew Ohlmeyer was watching.
Ohlmeyer was furious. The sources say he was sending notes constantly. "Lay off, O.J. It's not funny anymore. You're alienating half the audience."
And what was Norm's response?
Norm and Jim Downey's response was to double down. They wrote more O.J. jokes. They viewed it as a matter of journalistic or at least comedic integrity.
How so?
Their argument was, if the single biggest news story in the world is a famous person getting away with a double murder, a satirical news show must say that he did it. Anything else is cowardice. It's bending to power.
But Ohlmeyer held the power, and in early 1998, he played his hand.
He fired Norm from the Weekend Update desk. Jim Downey was fired as well.
What was the official reason they gave? It wasn't the OJ stuff, right?
Oh, no, of course not. The official reason was declining ratings and a drop-off in quality. Ohlmeyer claimed that his focus group research showed that people tuned out when Norm came on.
And did Norm buy that?
Not at the time. At the time, he saw it as pure censorship. But, years later, in interviews, Norm actually admitted that Ohlmeyer might have been technically right about the ratings part.
Really? He conceded the point.
He did, in his own way. He said something like, "Look, I was doing jokes about prison rape and crack whores and long, rambling stories. I knew they weren't crowd pleasers." He understood that from a purely corporate ratings-driven standpoint, he wasn't servicing the audience.
He was servicing the comedy.
He was servicing the comedy and his own conscience. But at the time, in 1998, he did not go quietly into the night. He went to war.
A media war.
Oh, it was a scorched earth campaign. It was incredible. He immediately went on his friend David Letterman's show on CBS, NBC's biggest rival, and just unloaded. He flat out accused Ohlmeyer of firing him to protect his murderer friend.
He didn't pull any punches.
None. He went on Howard Stern's radio show and did the same thing, calling Ohlmeyer a liar and a thug in the New York Daily News. He made it a huge public fight.
And Ohlmeyer retaliated. He was petty about it, too.
Extremely petty for a powerful network executive. Norm had a movie coming out called Dirty Work. Ohlmeyer blocked NBC from running any advertisements for it.
Just a vindictive move.
It was. But Norm's response was perfect. He went to the press and said, "The best revenge against Don Ohlmeyer is for everyone to go see the movie, specifically because he won't show the ads."
He turned the censorship into a marketing tool.
Exactly. There's this incredible awkward coda to his SNL tenure, though. He's fired from the anchor desk, but he still has a contract as a performer, so he has to stay on to do sketches.
Can you imagine the awkwardness? Walking those halls, seeing the executives who just publicly humiliated you, it must have been miserable.
He said he hated it. But he does one final sketch that I think is his true, defiant farewell to the show. It was a sketch called Who's More Grizzled?
With the musical guest, Garth Brooks.
Right. They're playing these two old, grizzled prospectors trying to one-up each other.
Yeah.
And at one point, Garth Brooks looks at Norm's character and says, completely in character, I don't much care for you.
And Norm's reply.
And Norm, looking almost directly at the camera, just says flatly, a lot of people don't.
It's the meta-commentary. He's acknowledging the firing, Allmeyer's hatred, all of it, right there in the middle of a silly sketch about cowboys.
It was his way of getting the last word, his way of saying, I know what's happening, I know you all know what's happening, and I'm still standing. He was dismissed from the show shortly after that.
So he leaves SNL, this huge platform, under this massive cloud of controversy, and this kicks off what some people called his wilderness years.
Right. He's out on his own. He makes that movie Dirty Work, which was directed by his friend Bob Saget. It's a cult classic now, but at the time.
At the time, critics hated it, and it didn't do well at the box office.
No, but it's a very funny, very Norm movie. It's literally a revenge comedy, which fits his mood at the time perfectly. Then he gets his own sitcom.
The Norm Show, which was later just called Norm.
And it ran for 3 seasons on ABC. That's not a failure by any means. 3-season run is respectable.
He played an ex-hockey player who gets busted for tax evasion and has to become a social worker.
It was a pretty standard sitcom setup, but it was a vehicle for his persona. It let him be Norm. But what's really interesting about this era is how he starts popping up in the weirdest places. He becomes this prolific voice actor.
Lucky the dog.
In the Eddie Murphy Dr. Dolittle movies. He's the voice of a wisecracking dog in a huge family film franchise.
And Death on Family Guy.
The voice of death itself. He's Frank the Beaver in commercials for Bell Mobility in Canada. For a short time, he was even the voice of Colonel Sanders for KFC.
They replaced him pretty quickly, didn't they?
They did. Apparently his version was a little too Norm. But it's so jarring, isn't it? You have this subversive, dark, intellectual comic, this guy who just fought a war with a network president, doing voices for children's movies and fast food commercials. But he took the work seriously. He had a distinct, memorable voice, and he used it. The money was good. But the defining moment, the artistic high point of this whole post-SNL era, has to be the Comedy Central roast of Bob Saget in 2008.
This is legendary. For people who are into comedy, this performance is like the Zapruder film or something. It gets analyzed frame by frame.
And context is absolutely key here. A Comedy Central roast, especially at that time, was a bloodbath. It's a competition to be as offensive, as raunchy, as shocking as humanly possible. People say unspeakable things about each other.
It's a contest of cruelty, basically. That's the whole point.
Exactly. So Norm is on the dais, and everyone expects him, as Saget's friend, to just destroy him with these dark inside jokes. Instead, he walks up to the podium, pulls out a stack of index cards, and starts reading these jokes that sound like they were written in 1955 for a Friars Club roast of Milton Berle.
Bob has a beautiful face, like a flower, a cauliflower.
There's a rumor going around that Bob Saget had an oral fixation. Of course, I don't believe it. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
It was pure, unadulterated anti-comedy. It was G-rated. It was intentionally beautifully bad.
And watching the audience reaction is the best part. The civilians in the crowd, the celebrities who aren't comedians, they are just baffled. They're thinking, is he bombing? Is this the end of his career?
But then you look at the dais. You look at the other comedians, Gilbert Gottfried, Cloris Leachman, Jeff Ross, Saget himself. They are crying with laughter. They're beside themselves.
Again, they get it.
They realize what he's doing. He is subverting the entire premise of the roast. He is proving that he can get the biggest laughs of the night by not being mean in a room that is entirely dedicated to meanness. It was a protest.
It was a total act of defiance. He refused to be shocking just because the format demanded it of him. It was the most punk rock thing you could possibly do at a roast.
And he ended his set with this incredibly sincere, heartfelt tribute, calling Saget a gentleman and a scholar and a true friend. It was sweet, it was confounding, and he was brilliant.
Now, we have to pivot here a little bit because while he's doing these masterful, sort of high-concept deconstructions of comedy on stage, his personal life is being deconstructed by a very serious addiction.
Norm was a massive gambler.
And addiction is the right word, but Norm analyzed it like a philosopher. He didn't just gamble. He went to the absolute edge, where he went broke, totally bankrupt, twice.
He admitted in his book and in interviews to losing everything he owned 3 separate times.
3 times. Imagine making millions of dollars and losing it all, not once, but 3 times.
The numbers are staggering. He talked about winning 6 figures at a craps table in Atlantic City early on, and that's what hooked him. But the losses were way bigger. He said his largest single loss was $400,000.
Gone in one night.
Vaporized.
I can't even process the anxiety that would come with that. But Norm said something about the losing that I find completely fascinating. He said he almost preferred it to winning.
This is the key to his psyche, I think. He said that winning was just more money. It didn't fundamentally change anything, but losing everything. He described it as a feeling of profound relief. He said it cleared the mechanism.
Because you don't have to worry about protecting your pile of chips anymore. Is that the idea?
Exactly. It stripped him down to zero. It forced him to rely only on his wits and his talent again. It was a reset button. For him, it seems he was addicted to the risk, to the feeling of being on the precipice, not necessarily to the reward.
He wasn't just a casino gambler either. He was a serious poker player.
A grinder. A real grinder. He competed in the World Series of Poker. He cashed in 2007 for over $13,000. But he was also obsessed with online poker.
Right. This was in the boom years of online poker.
And he would play up to 20 tables at once on the internet, just sitting there, click, 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 for hours and hours. He said it was the only thing that could shut his brain off.
And he made this incredible claim that when the U.S. government shut down online poker, it saved his life.
He was serious. He said the constant grind was keeping him awake for days at a time. He was just fueling himself with caffeine and adrenaline. He was replacing sleep with the dopamine hit of the next hand.
It was about occupying his mind.
Occupying the mind so the darker thoughts, the philosophical anxieties, couldn't get in.
And speaking of deeper thoughts, this is another one of the great contradictions of Norm Macdonald. You have this guy who tells jokes about crack whores, who loses millions of dollars at the craps table. And he was a devout Christian.
And not in a casual, I believe in a higher power sort of way. He was serious about it. He was deeply read in theology and religious literature.
In the comedy world, that's not the norm, so to speak. Religion is usually the punchline. You're supposed to be a cynical atheist.
And Norm just refused that.
Yeah.
He read Tolstoy, he read Dostoevsky, Chekhov. In interviews, he would compare his views on faith to Søren Kierkegaard and Cardinal Newman. These are not lightweights.
I remember seeing him on the reality show Last Comic Standing. He was a judge.
That was such a telling moment. There was a young contestant who did this very lazy, very predictable set, mocking the Bible and comparing it to Harry Potter, just standard religion as fairy tales stuff. And Norm stopped the show. He wasn't angry, but he was serious. He said, I don't think the Bible and Harry Potter are comparable. He then quoted a J.K. Rowling interview to the guy to make his point.
He wasn't offended as a Christian, it seemed. He was offended as an intellectual.
That's it, exactly. He hated lazy thinking.
Yeah.
His point was, if you're going to attack something that's foundational to Western civilization as the Bible, you better know what you're talking about. You better have done the reading. He respected the text.
It goes back to that same integrity, that refusal to just go along with the crowd. The comedy crowd says religion is dumb, so Norm says, actually, let's talk about Kierkegaardian leaps of faith.
And he played with that idea of truth versus fiction in his book.
Right, based on a true story, a memoir.
Which he subtitled, not a memoir. It's a semi-fictional memoir. He wrote a book about his own life that is filled with the most obvious fantastical lies.
He has a ghostwriter character who is a real person in the book following him around. He tells these elaborate stories that clearly never happened.
He does.
Why do that? Why not just write a straightforward confessional autobiography? It probably would have sold better.
Because Norm believed that the truth of a person isn't a list of facts and dates. It's the vibe, the voice, the spirit of that person. He felt he could tell you more about who he really was by making up a crazy funny story than by telling you what he had for breakfast on June 5th, 1994. The fiction was truer than the facts.
Which brings us, in a very heavy way, to the ultimate truth that he hid from absolutely everyone, the final chapter of his life.
The secret. This is the part of his story that, when you learn it, it recontextualizes everything we've just talked about.
Okay, so it's 2013. Norm is enjoying a bit of a career renaissance. He has his brilliant podcast, Norm Macdonald Live. He's about to get a show on Netflix. He's revered by this new generation of online comedy fans. But privately.
Privately, he is diagnosed with multiple myeloma. It's a cancer of the plasma cells in the bone marrow. It's a serious, often terminal blood cancer.
And he tells.
Who? Almost nobody. His immediate family, his agent, and his producing partner, Lori Jo Hoekstra. That's it.
Lorne Michaels didn't know. David Letterman didn't know. His best friends in comedy, like Adam Sandler and David Spade, had no idea. The public certainly didn't know.
For 9 years.
9 years. He underwent chemotherapy, he took heavy medications, he was in and out of hospitals, he faced the prospect of his own death, and he did it all in total, absolute silence.
Why? I mean, in this day and age, a public figure battling cancer, it's a PR opportunity. You get the magazine cover, you get the Oprah interview, you get the Bravery Award at some gala.
That is exactly what he despised. That is what he was running from. He said explicitly to the very few people who knew that he did not want the diagnosis to affect how he was perceived by the audience.
You don't want pity.
He said, I don't want the audience to look at me and think, oh, they're poor man. He wanted the laughs to be clean, untainted.
Because if you know a comedian is dying, you laugh differently. You laugh because you want to be nice. You laugh out of sympathy. And Norm viewed that as a fundamental corruption of the art form.
A fake laugh.
A fake laugh. For him, the transaction had to be pure. You laugh because the joke is funny, or you don't laugh because it isn't. There could be no other variables.
And you have to think about the physical toll this took on him and how he let people misinterpret it. He gained a lot of weight in his later years.
Dexamethasone. It's a powerful steroid that's a common part of myeloma treatment. It makes you bloat. It gives you that moon face look.
And people online, and even some critics, were cruel about it. They made jokes. They said he was getting fat, that he was letting himself go, that he looked like an old lesbian, a joke he would sometimes lean into and make about himself.
And he let them. He let them mock him for being out of shape, rather than admit that he was sick.
That is a level of commitment to the bit. The bit being, I'm just a regular guy that I can't even wrap my head around.
Yeah.
He would rather be ridiculed for his appearance than pitied for his tragedy.
It's unbelievable. He also suffered from peripheral neuropathy, another side effect, which caused pain in his hands and feet. He had to quit golf and tennis, things he loved, but he never explained why.
And he kept working right up until the very end.
He was recording voiceovers for Seth MacFarlane's show, The Orville, from his hospital bed. He was planning and writing a new hour of stand-up.
And then he died on September 14th, 2021. He was 61 years old. And for the entire world, it was a complete shock.
It was a shockwave because nobody saw it coming. It was like a magician's final trick. He was there, vibrant and funny, and then he was just gone.
But he left one last thing behind for the audience.
Nothing special.
His final stand-up special.
He had this whole new hour of material ready to go, but he couldn't film it with an audience because of the pandemic and his declining health. So in the summer of 2020, before he was going to go into the hospital for a major procedure, he thought he might not wake up from.
What did he do?
He sat down in his living room, put on a shirt and a sports coat, put on a pair of headphones, turned on a single camera, and he did the entire hour-long set.
With no audience, no laughter, no feedback. Just a dying man talking to a lens.
And Netflix released it posthumously. And it's brilliant. It's maybe the most essential Norm Macdonald performance there is.
It was nominated for 3 Emmy Awards.
Because it proved that his timing, his sense of rhythm, was so internal, so perfect, that he didn't even need the audience's feedback to know where the pauses and the beats were. He was performing for an imaginary audience in his head, and he nailed it.
It's the purest distillation of his comedy, just the man and the words.
It is. And the tributes that followed his death, from Chappelle, from Letterman, from Lorne Michaels, from everyone, they weren't just mourning a friend. They were mourning a standard of artistic integrity that doesn't really exist anymore.
And there is one final perfect irony to all this. In April of 2024, O.J. Simpson died.
And what happened? Instantly, all over social media, what went viral?
Norm's Weekend Update jokes. 25 years later.
It was like a final victory lap from beyond the grave. All his old clips, murder is legal in the state of California, all of it was everywhere.
Conan O'Brien pointed this out on his show. He said that because Norm refused to move on or be polite or forget about it, he ended up creating the definitive, lasting, historical record of how a huge portion of the world actually felt about that trial.
He was the only one honest enough to keep saying it, so his version became the one that history remembered.
So we've looked at the logger, the anchor, the gambler, the believer, and the secret warrior. When you put it all together, what's the final takeaway? What did Norm Macdonald represent?
I think it comes down to what we talked about at the very beginning. Risk. Norm Macdonald lived his entire life with all his chips on the table. He risked his physical safety in the woods. He risked his entire career for a joke about a murderer. He risked his financial stability over and over for the thrill of the dice. And in the end, he risked his own legacy by refusing to explain himself or his suffering.
He never asked for our sympathy. He only asked for our attention. And even then, it felt like he only wanted it on his own terms.
Which is why he remains so compelling. In a world of constant brand management and therapeutic oversharing, he was the last great mystery. And that brings us to the final thought I want to leave with you.
God.
Norm Macdonald went broke gambling. He destroyed his own biggest career opportunity for the sake of a joke, and he refused to monetize his own tragedy for sympathy points, which is something our culture almost demands now. So the question is, in an era where a career is a brand to be managed, was his refusal to compromise his greatest act of self-sabotage, or was it the very thing that made him a genius? Was destroying the career the only way to perfect the art?
Something to think about. Thank you for listening to this deep dive. It's a reminder that sometimes the funniest thing you can do is simply tell the truth no matter who gets mad.
Or who gets fired?